5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 70. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagements, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to the show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagements and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create these positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience, and this is what the show is all about, sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Laurie Battaglia, author of the book Aligned Workplaces, Integration of Life and Work, a practical guide for leaders and teams. And she is the CEO and workplace strategist of AlignedAtWork. Today with Laurie, we talk about the cost of employee disengagement and turnover. What are the 5 success factors to build an engaging workplace and how leaders can implement each of them? Those factors are vocation, relationships, finances, well-being, and spirit. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Laurie. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummits.com or on Twitter at @EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Today's guest is Laurie Battaglia. She is calling from Scottsdale in Arizona. She is the author of the book Aligned Workplaces, Integration of Life and Work, a practical guide for leaders and teams. And Laurie is also the CEO and workplace strategist for AlignedAtWork. Laurie, thanks for joining us today.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Well, I like to say that I'm a recovering banker because I spent about 37 years in the banking and finance and investment banking world. And along the way, decided that someday I wanted to have my own company and to be working with leaders and doing training and all those kinds of things. And it evolved along the way. But finally, after dreaming this thing up in 1993, finally in 2015, I left my day job and created became AlignedAtWork. We had a little bit of a side hustle going on, my husband and I doing coaching as Living the Dream coaches during my last 4 years at work. But when I transitioned out, I realized very quickly that I didn't want to give up working with leaders and teams and helping workplaces be better workplaces. So therefore, AlignedAtWork got born. And I like to say that we work with leaders to solve those people problems before they become profit problems, because typically our people problems keep us from to put it in work language, they keep us from being efficient. They keep us from really focusing on workplace goals and all of that. And they create a lot of drama. And when we're engaged in drama, we really can't be as effective as we could be and frankly, as engaged as we could be at work. So I believe it really all comes down to leadership.
Okay, I completely agree with that. I discuss a lot on this podcast about high employee disengagement rates in the workplace and how competitive talent acquisition has become. So the cost of replacing a disengaged employee who pulls the trigger or decided to quit is quite high. So what is your take on this?
I'm right there with you. I pull a lot of statistics into my talks and into my book, and there will be even more of those. I like to combine statistics and stories because I think different ones of us resonate in different ways. But what I know is that if somebody leaves an organization, it can take you up to 2 years or more, depending on what level and how key they were to operations in the organization. It can take you up to 2 years or more to get the next person trained up. And a lot of us function in systems in larger organizations where people can post out after a year or 18 months, and we're really just starting to get the lift that we want from an employee. And as an employee, when I put that hat on, we're just beginning to start to master our craft at 1 to 2 years into a role. And that's when we start to get really good at what we do. So I think there's the hard cost of it, and there's the soft cost of the impact on the leader, the people around the person, and the person themselves. So it's really about the humanity.
It's interesting because it reminds me of my very first job out of college was in France several years ago. I won't mention how many years ago. And I remember that my boss actually told me, let's do a moral contract. And that, I'm going to train you, I'm going to invest in you. And what I expect in return is at least a 3-year commitment. Mm-hmm. Because it takes about 3 years for you to be fully productive.
Yes.
And and he said, I see this as a win-win situation. I'm going to give everything you need to be trained and to develop and grow. And in return, and it's a gentleman agreement. There's nothing in writing. Right. But in return, I hope that, or I expect that you're going to stay at least 3 years in this role. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, we know, we see this all over the place, that typically employees leave companies not because they have found a better job or better paying job, but mostly because they leave because of their managers, right? And bad managers.
Yeah.
So, and what do you think happens here? Is it a miss in the way we train and we develop and we coach managers, or is it something different?
I think a lot of it can be. So to put in a plug for leadership training, I do believe that great leadership training exposes people to their own self-awareness, exposes leaders to their own self-awareness. And I think that the more self-aware we are, the more we go looking for feedback. We care what other people think. We care if we're having a negative impact on someone. But for me, I've had 2 really bad bosses, and I always say they're bad bosses for me because they might have been fine for somebody else, but they just didn't sync up with me. And one of them was because that boss was very, very detailed and structured, and I am very, very big picture and unstructured until I need to be structured. And I found that the amount of detail that he was asking for on a daily basis was just sucking the life out of me. And I did not intentionally go seeking another job, but I was actually looking for one of my team members who was getting restless. And ironically, this was in the early 2000s. And ironically, I think she's still in a similar role, but I went out looking and stumbled across the next job that I took and actually ended up with a great boss for me who let me be myself. And then I ran into I went from her after 6 years to another even worse boss. And I left the company at that point because I was just done, and found a job in a different company, and again ended up with the best boss. So I've done worst to best twice. And I think you come out of it knowing what you don't want to put up with every day. And that boss was just a little crazy. That wasn't just me. But I think people kept hoping, if folks end up looking at a picture of me, they'll see that I'm white-haired and in my early 60s. And this boss was a good 6-8 years older than me. So I've had some people ask me, was it age discrimination? I'm like, well, I don't know. He was older than I was, but he just did not give great direction. And in both cases, both of those bad bosses believed that if they didn't fill you with negativity, they weren't, quote unquote, motivating you. And I react really bad to that kind of leadership. I want to know what I do well. I want to play to my strengths. And if I have a serious derailer, then tell me. But other than that, tell me what the end goal is and get out of my way. And that's what I know I need. That's not what everybody needs. Other people need different things. But a great boss, a great leader will really ask people about the way they thrive and are motivated and do what they can to meet them where they are. It's not that we have to spend our days bending over backwards to put up with, bad behavior or anything like that. It's not that at all. It's understanding who people are as individuals and then meeting them where they are, giving the latitude that they can under those circumstances to meet that person's needs and still get the business needs met. It's also not about people at all costs and no profit, no business. It's that blend of the two and the harmony between.
When we connected, we talked about what you do, and I was really excited about your very common sense, but very interesting and very articulated approach about the success factors to build an engaging workplace. And when I say common sense, I do believe they're common sense, but for whatever reason, many organizations actually don't know how to implement those different steps. So can you walk through each of them, and we'll go through them one by one, but there are 5 altogether: vocation, relationships, finances, well-being, and spirit. So let's go with the first one, vocation. What do you mean by vocation?
Well, when I talk about vocation, I just kind of alluded to it a little bit. When a person feels like they're doing the right work, and I'll kind of put that in quotes, right work, it's work that energizes someone. So I'll say me for this example. So if I'm doing work that energizes me and fits my strengths and fits my value system, whatever that is, and has a workplace culture that I can really connect in, then I'm going to do really good work. And what we hear more and more, not only from the generations coming in now, the millennials, of course, have been in the workplace for 15 years, and Generation Z is following them in, they're looking for work that has more meaning and purpose to it. And then I'm a baby boomer. Because we are beginning to transition out of the traditional workplace or thinking about when that might be, are really interested in leaving a legacy behind. So oftentimes as we approach the tail end of our career time to figure out what that next chapter is, we are interested in legacy and meaning and larger purpose. So I think when those things come together, the energizing, the strengths, the values, the culture, and then larger purpose, people feel like they're doing the right work in the right place.
So I agree with you that a sense of purpose is a big boost when you join a company, or even for your first job. After a while, even though this sense of purpose still is a driver, it's not just enough to get you energized, as motivated, and happy to get up in the morning and go to work. You have to be able to see some growth opportunities, some promotion opportunities. So what companies can do a bit differently or beyond just having a very clear sense of purpose, so that those employees feel fulfills over a long period of time of commitment?
I think what individual leaders can do is to really encourage people to experiment with roles. A lot of times, if we make the time, we can have people shadow other people or go try out internships internally or my whole first 20 years of my career was spent in small companies. And I'll tell you, all you had to do was volunteer to go fix that problem over there, and you got the opportunity to go do it because there weren't thousands of people around to do it. There was maybe less than 100 people to get everything done. So role experimentation is something that I inadvertently did early in my career, but in the larger companies, you have to be intentional about it and let people try things out. The other thing that leaders can do is to really, of course, you and I have had conversations about this, treat people with respect and equality and inclusion and make them feel like they really belong in that workplace. And a lot of that is through one-on-one conversations. They don't have to be horribly long, but they need to be done intentionally and sometimes unintentionally and really have the employee in mind. And of course, pay them fairly, but find out what else is important and then lead them by their strengths rather than, I grew up in workplaces where it was always, you do these 10 things well, but you're not so hot at, let's say, structure and detail. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can try to force me all day, and I'll get to a certain point and be able to function there. And I've had very structured, detailed jobs that I did well in, but it's not going to light me up. So what can I do and do well? And then how do we balance that out with the rest of the team?
The second success factors is what you define as relationships.
Yes. So I oftentimes start this one out and ask people the question, are you good at forming functional, supportive relationships? Because in a lot of cases, we grow up in families and situations and, factor in school and anything you've got going in the community. And you may be good at forming a support system and being one for other people, and you may be really surrounded by dysfunction. So again, self-awareness comes in here. But in the relationships, if we think about relationships at work, some of the statistics say that people will stay a lot longer if they like the people they work with, or they don't go looking in the first place if they like the people they work with. So do we feel supported at work? Do we feel like when things are going well, we can celebrate? When things aren't going so well, we have somebody to commiserate with? Can we get ourselves back on the path? Because I've also worked in highly dramatic workplaces where all we did was complain about that one boss or that one process or whatever it was that we were complaining about. But it's really about forming good support systems, having a leader that cares. So leaders really come into this one a lot because people also stay when they believe that the leader cares about them and their personal and professional development. And working on common mission and celebrating together is also a big piece of forming what they call these days psychologically safe teams where people trust each other and they really can come together.
It's interesting because oftentimes, when we think of workplace relationships, whether it's between individuals or between employees and the organization, it's more about self-serving relationship. Mm-hmm. In one way or another. It doesn't have to be from the organization to the employees. It can be either one as well. You have some people wanting to work for very well-known brands or companies to build up their resumes and to go somewhere else after that. So, and that's right. Self-serving from an employee perspective. But when you look at from an organizational perspective, it is, many organizations still see the employees as disposable. And I'm not just talking about, laying off people when times are difficult, but also just ending the relationship when that employee leaves the company for whatever reason.
Right.
There's I like to think of the alumni network. When an employee leaves a company, the relationship shouldn't end there, but oftentimes companies see that relationship as an end when the employee leaves. Yeah. Right. So, just to expand a little bit on this, how do you see, or how do you think we should fix that misconception conception of what the true relationship should be between an employee and the employer.
Well, it's kind of funny. As you were talking, I was thinking that when I went through my master's program, one of my professors gave me a couple of things that I always come back to. And one of them is relationship before task. So before you go out and ask for something, form the relationship first and give before you get. And the other thing is meet them where they are. So both of them kind of come in here. I think for relationships, there's a piece of what the leader can do with teams. They can form a safe place to come. If teams, I worry when I see highly competitive teams that are always sort of joshing back and forth with each other and sticking little needles in because they joke a lot. And, if we're not picking on you, we don't like you. Okay, that can go a little too far, or it doesn't always set well with everybody. So really understand people and form a safe place where people, if they do get vulnerable, don't get sort of thrown under the bus for that vulnerability. But vulnerability is actually one of the things that builds trust fastest. If I know something about you and you know something about me, then we tend to trust each other, especially if it's sort of, somebody's dark little secret. But to get back to the leaders can form that safe place with a team where people are treated well and not, abused by other people on the team or bullied. They can also use that common mission and vision and celebration to unite people. And oftentimes leaders will celebrate in ways that work for them, but it doesn't work for everybody else. So I'm a big advocate for ask them how they want to celebrate this. It might be time off and away from each other where you think you're going to take everybody to the park and have a good time. And people might like that and they might not like that. You never know. It varies from person to person and team to team.
And we'll probably touch a bit on the question I'm going to ask you when we talk about well-being. But going back to the example I was giving earlier in my first job was that sort of moral or gentleman agreements that, there was an expectation that would stay three years in the organization to be able to provide some return on investment on the training that was given to me. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly there is a general agreement that's no longer or long gone are the days where people are going to stay for the entire professional life in one organization. Right. And the average, I think, tenure is about 4.5 years now. So organizations, I think, at least if they don't understand it, should understand that when they hire someone new to the company, chances are this person isn't going to last for a long time. Right. And they should be able actually to embrace this and think about how can we do, what can I do, or what can we do as an organization to make the best of the time being spent together, and how can we build and expand that relationship just for the time that we're going to spend together, knowing that at some point your employee is going to leave. Yeah, I'm a big one on accepting what is and then figuring out, what the benefit is of that. So if we think we're only going to have somebody for a couple of years, there are organizations that do such phenomenal training, but then don't have atmospheres where people want to stick around. So everybody else around that company loves them because they turn out a well-trained person and then they go land someplace that they really want to work. So there's that. I heard a great talk, and there's a book, and I believe it's called The Alliance. I know I have it on my bookshelf. And they talked about tours of duty, although they said it really wasn't having to do with military at all. But it was accepting this fact that somebody's probably not going to stay their entire life at your company. So if you have them for a period of time, what's the thing they want to work on? And what's the thing that you, leader, need to get from them so that it's a reciprocal kind of relationship? And it was the first time I'd really heard, that was a couple of years ago, I saw a keynote, and I really liked the concept of it because it is accepting what is, that we may have this person for a long time or we may not. So what's in it for them and what's in it for us? And let's get the best for all worlds if we can. Right, and if you build that relationship, if you burn, that relationship, there's no way this employee would eventually or potentially come back to the organization a few years later.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, because sometimes that happens. People go away and come back again, and some organizations really look at that as disloyalty, and others are like, "Welcome back. You know the system. This is great." So
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The third factor is finances.
Yes.
What is it?
So I'm as I mentioned, have spent most of my professional life around money. And my husband always says you run towards your worst fear. And I told him he was crazy. And he said, well, what is your worst fear, Laurie? And I said, well, that someone would take all my money. And he goes, what have you been doing with your life? So I guess that's one of the, subconscious reasons I ended up around money my whole life, even though I ended up in the people end of it. So finances is two things. It's a little bit about the mindset. And I was raised by World War II veteran. My parents met during World War II in the Navy and lived through the Depression. So this mindset of there's never enough money, there's never enough money, there's never enough money, colors everything you do. And I think money is power. And I think that a lot of people stay in situations and relationships and jobs where they should have walked away a long time ago, but they don't because of the fear of, well, I won't be able to replace my salary, or what about my benefits, or what about. So peace is mindset. And then there's the very practical way of how do you manage your money? Do you know how to budget? Do you know how to achieve goals? Do you know how to invest money? One of my friends says there's either building wealth or there's, what is the other one? Build wealth or make money. Like, do you want to stockpile it or do you just want to create it? And I always said I was pretty good at building wealth because I went to all the free classes that my employers had,
sure,
so that I've been able to do that. So it is really about dissecting mindset, but it's also about the practical application of, do you have the skills you need? And can you get rid of the shame that you probably have around not fully understanding your money? Because most of us have some gap somewhere, and we don't really want to admit it.
Okay, so the fourth success factor to build an engaging workplace is probably my favorite one, well-being.
Yes.
And that's a very, very important one. Now, more and more organizations are looking at wellness the wrong way.
Yeah.
Meaning wellness is, all right, so let's have a wellness program. And I talked on this podcast a couple of times with wellness expert on this. Let's look at wellness and build a wellness program to reduce our insurance premium, for instance.
Yes.
Right. But you have to look at more holistically.
You do. I find that sometimes employers will put in a wellness, let's say they have a walking challenge and everybody goes out and gets a certain number of steps.
Yeah.
But if the culture's toxic, you come right back into that. So you go out and you kind of, quote unquote, get healthy, and then you come back in and the job itself or the leader or the people around you are just sucking the soul right out of you. So well-being in this model is about health, happiness, and success. So there's a healthy piece there, but it's also about your definition of happiness and success and where that mindset came from. So there is mindset a couple places in here. Where did it come from? Can you define that for yourself? Is there a healthy work environment? And then do you feel safe? Is that psychological safety piece there in the workplace, or do you feel like you're kind of being set up? So those are really the factors. It is a more holistic look at not just health and wellness, but the whole well-being piece.
Right, and we talk a lot about work. We used to talk about work-life balance.
Yes.
And now it's more about work-life integration.
Yes.
And that's really what it is, because you can't separate what happened in your personal life to what happens at work. And either one has an impact on the other.
Yes.
Right? If you have issues at work and you get stressed and you have an awful manager or it's a very high stressful job, it's going to impact how you behave back at home after work hours or with your social network. And then if you have things that happen outside of work, you're going to be a bit maybe distracted and not giving your best at work. So the whole approach is really holistically, and how do you integrate work-life together, and wellness, well-being is well beyond, as you said, just a step program or whatever else it might be. This is mostly about mental health more than anything else.
Yes.
I would say.
Yeah. It's the physical, and then it's the mental, emotional, and of course the spiritual component of the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. The fifth success factor to build an engaging workplace is the spirit.
Yes. So when I talk about this with people, I oftentimes say, this is not about religion, although it might be for you. So if you're a highly religious person and that's who you are authentically, that's your authentic self, then it is that for you. But for many of us, it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious component of it. So in this model, it's really about being authentically you. So who are you really? And can you bring almost, or in a perfect world, all of yourself to work? So you could call it soul, whole self, spirit, whatever label you want to put on it. It's, do you understand who you are? And do you understand that when you show up at work or in your life in general, that you have impact on everyone around you and that you are connected to everyone around you? So there is kind of a universal, or maybe depending on people's belief systems, there is a God component in here of that connectedness. But it is about us and our connectedness to ourselves and to others.
What do you say is, among those 5 success factors we just discussed, what is the most challenging one to execute on?
I think when I wrote the book, the thing I had the hardest time with was finances, oddly enough, only because there's so many resources out there, but which one to recommend? And I know how badly it can go with money. I think for many people, though, they just don't give these things conscious thought. So we've really not thought often about what kind of work energizes us. I find when we ask people that, there's always I don't know. Is that why I feel so tired when I get home and drained? Yeah, because you're not doing work or that works for you or culture. So I don't know if there's anyone that's the hardest. I just think it's hard to be self-aware, and it takes conscious effort to do that. And a lot of people are so busy, and they've got lives and kids and jobs and stuff going on that they just don't focus on themselves.
Now, when you are in a company that's been around for a long time, it's really hard to reshape the culture, right? So for a leader, for instance, and again, when I say leader, it's not just an executive, but someone actually who can lead the change in an organization.
Yeah.
What would be the first thing or the first factor to look at to try to make a change?
I think the easiest one to work on, and that's why the model is built in this way, is vocation. I think it's easy to make impact on how people go about their jobs, and whether the organization is small or large, whoever's in charge has more ability to influence that than they usually think they do. Even if they're in a cog in the wheel of a large organization, you have more ability to influence people's lives and the way they work and all of those factors that are in vocation than you think you do. So I always say start there and work your way in, because the uncovering the soul of who you are can be challenging for people. That's that spirit part piece.
It's interesting because it just reminds me for those who are listening to us and probably may be new to the podcast, I live in Indiana, and a couple of years ago I went with my daughter. It was a Girl Scout trip, and we went to visit Subaru plants in central Indiana. And so when you think of building cars, there's nothing really that is purposeful, right? You just build a car. How sexy is that to build a car, unless it's a Ferrari or Lamborghini?
Right.
Now, what Subaru was really good at, and it's probably not the only car manufacturer that does it, but they had great stories from real people and mostly from employees of theirs that either were in a car crash or avoided a car crash, but because of, and I'm not making any commercial here for Subaru, but because of Subaru's high safety standards, they were able to survive or to avoid the crash. So anyhow, but by building those stories, and again, generated by the employees themselves or by some other customers, they were able to find a purpose even for those working on the in the assembly line.
Yes.
Right. So I would say the point that is that wherever you work is whatever you do, your organization and your manager can find a sense of purpose in what you do and connect it to something bigger. It doesn't have to be saving lives and being a firefighter and saving lives every single day. It can be something that is, again, building cars, but find something meaningful behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, you can find it anywhere at all. I'm reminded of, I do some work in an insurance company, and someone came up and was talking to me about not feeling like her job had value, because what she really wanted to be doing was yoga classes on the beach. But we're in the desert, so that's not even close to here. So I said, well, what do you do? And she said, I file claims all day long. And I'm like, so you're the person that, if I have a healthcare claim, I'm going to call you, or maybe my house burned down, or whatever kind of claims you're doing. I'm going to call you about that claim. Yeah. Doesn't feel very important. I said, I can assure you it is to the person on the other end of the phone. And so a lot of times when we get stuck in that daily work, we think that what we do is like ain't no big deal, but it is to other people. But like, it made me wonder where we lose that connection to that. You know, how did she get to the point? Or is it just that she feels like she ought to be a yoga teacher somewhere, and so that's so far from what she's doing that she feels that there's no reason to be doing what she's doing? It's it's a conundrum.
It is indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
So before we wrap it up for the day, let me ask you some fun questions, and then we'll go through some words of wisdom for you, just to conclude our conversation today. If you were to invite someone famous or a historical figure to dinner, who would you pick and why?
Well, I would invite a pair. I would invite Martin Luther King and Gandhi to dinner, because I'm always interested in peaceful protest. I believe strongly in peaceful protest and changing the world as a result of it. And both of them had certainly uphill battles. I've watched a lot of their movies and things about their lives. So they'd be my two first ones.
Okay, very nice. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, so you and I had some conversations about this. My favorite escape place, and it was even when I lived on the East Coast, I like to get away to Sedona, Arizona. So that's about 2 hours up the hill from here. I find it to be very grounding and uplifting at the same time, and there's no place like sitting or hiking on Bell Rock in Sedona, Arizona, or just outside Sedona. My favorite place in the whole world.
Yeah, it's for those who haven't been there, it's just beautiful and amazing.
Yes.
So staying on the vacation topic, what is the essential item that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
I must have a book with me, and it's got to be, I want to feel the paper in my hands, so I'd prefer paperback, and I'd prefer fiction for vacation, so that I can just sort of escape into the story. I read a lot of books that are nonfiction and a lot of spiritual books, and from time to time, and I like a good fiction book to go on vacation with.
What is your favorite fiction book?
Ooh.
If you had to pick one.
I have read so many of them. I don't know if I have a couple favorite authors. Jodi Picoult will just rip the heart out of you somewhere along the line. And I love Lisa Scottolini from Philadelphia. I've seen her a couple times. I've met her. And she writes great female-based legal crime stuff based in Philadelphia. So I always feel like I'm home again when I read hers. Jennifer Weiner's another one from Philadelphia that I enjoy. Anything the three of them put out are great. I do read male authors as well. I've just managed to highlight 3 female authors.
What is your favorite dish? It can be a dessert, it can be main dish, starter, whatever it might be.
My favorite dessert, I don't do dessert unless it's a special occasion, but I'm really fond of the little tiny desserts that they have at Seasons 52 because I don't feel any guilt with eating one of those because they're low calorie and small. But give me a good creme brulee anytime.
Okay. All right. Do you say that because I'm French or no?
No, no, I just realized that and I was like, and I said it wrong. Creme brulee.
All right. If you were the last women on Earth, what would you do?
Go look for other people. There was I don't know who created the series and what it was called, but there is one about, I think it was all based around Tucson, Arizona, actually. Can't remember if it was Last Man Standing or Last Person on Earth or something like that.
Last Man on Earth, yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty funny. They thought nobody was around, but eventually they rounded up maybe a good 8-10 people.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'd go look for other people.
All right. What is the way for our listeners to follow you on social media?
I'm big on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you can find me, the standard is linkedin.com/IN/, and then it's my name spelled LaurieBattaglia, Laurie Battaglia. You can also find me on Twitter at AlignedAtWork. And you can follow our Facebook page also on facebook.com/AlignedAtWork.
All right, awesome. And we'll share those in the podcast notes as well.
Awesome.
Any last word of wisdom or advice?
I would say that, I challenge everyone to go out into the world and be authentically who you are and see how that changes the way others show up around you. It's not always easy. But I continue to unpack that even in my 60s, my early 60s. I continue to unpack who I am now. And my challenge to myself and to other people is always to go out with the intent to make a positive impact in your own life, of course, but on the lives of others as well, because we have each other and we're all connected.
I agree with that. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Laurie, and thanks so much for sharing very good insights with us.
Thank you, Stefan. It's been fun to plan this and do it with you.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.